The elevator's soft chime echoed through the marble lobby of Cross Tower as Evangeline Cross stepped out, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor with the confidence of a woman who owned the world, or at least a significant portion of it. At 32, she had built Cross Industries from the ground up, transforming it into a billion-dollar empire that commanded respect across 3 continents. The late evening sun cast golden shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting her auburn hair with copper highlights as she walked toward the exit. Her assistant had long since gone home, along with most of her employees, but Evangeline preferred these quiet hours when the building belonged solely to her thoughts and ambitions. She paused at the revolving door, adjusting her black blazer, a armor of silk and determination she wore like a second skin. 6 years ago, she had learned the hard way that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. Love was a distraction that nearly destroyed everything she had worked for. Now success was her companion, ambition her lover, and solitude her sanctuary. The cool Chicago evening air greeted her as she stepped onto the sidewalk, already reaching for her phone to call her driver. But something made her freeze, a familiar silhouette near the fountain across the street, backlit by the warm glow of streetlights. Evie. The voice that spoke her name was like a ghost from her past, rich and warm with that slight southern drawl that once made her heart skip. She turned, slowly, her breath catching in her throat as Adrian Kane stepped into the light. He looked different, older, more weathered around the edges, but still devastatingly handsome with those piercing blue eyes and dark hair that always seemed perpetually tousled. Adrian. His name fell from her lips like a prayer and a curse, combined. But it wasn't just Adrian standing there. 2 small figures emerged from behind him, a boy and a girl who couldn't be more than 5 years old. They had Adrian's dark hair and strong jawline, but their eyes, their eyes were unmistakably hers, the same unusual shade of green with gold flecks that she saw in the mirror every morning. "Daddy, is this her?" the little girl asked, her voice sweet and curious as she looked up at Evangeline with wonder. Evangeline's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. Her briefcase slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering onto the sidewalk as she stared at the children who were clearly impossibly hers. "These are Emma and Ethan," Adrian said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Your children, Evie." "My... what?" The words came out as barely a whisper. She looked from the twins to Adrian, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. I would have known." "You left before you could know," Adrian interrupted gently. "The divorce was finalized. You were already in London expanding the company. By the time I found out..." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered all too well. "You'd made it clear you never wanted to see me again." Emma, the little girl, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Mommy, Daddy said you were very busy building castles in the sky, but that you had the most beautiful green eyes, just like us." Evangeline's breath hitched. The endearment she'd never heard, from a child she'd never known existed, hit her like a physical blow. She knelt down slowly, bringing herself to Emma's eye level, afraid to move too quickly lest this impossible moment shatter like glass. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to maintain composure. Ethan, more reserved than his sister, watched her carefully. "Are you really our mom? The one in the pictures?" Pictures. Adrian had pictures of her, had shown them to their children. The thought sent a complex mix of emotions through her chest: anger, longing, and something dangerously close to hope. She looked up at Adrian, seeing the man who had once been her everything, now standing before her with the family she never knew they'd created together. The wall she'd built so carefully around her heart began to crack, and Evangeline Cross, billionaire, CEO, woman of steel, felt truly vulnerable for the first time in 6 years. The penthouse restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan had been their place once, where Adrian had proposed on a snowy December evening that felt like a lifetime ago. Now, as Evangeline sat across from him in the intimate booth, the twins coloring, on paper placemats between them, the irony wasn't lost on her. "Start talking," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. She'd recovered her composure during the car ride, slipping back into her CEO persona like familiar armor, but her hands still trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Adrian watched Emma help Ethan choose the right crayon for his drawing, his expression soft with paternal love before meeting Evangeline's gaze. "You disappeared, Evie. One day we were screaming at each other about the prenup. Your lawyers insisted on about trust and love and whether they could coexist, and the next day you were gone. London, then Tokyo, building your empire. You told me to choose," she countered, memories flooding back with painful clarity. "You said I couldn't have both, you and my ambitions. You made it an ultimatum." "I was 26 and stupid," he admitted, running his thumb along the rim of his whiskey glass. "I was scared of losing you to your work, so I tried to make you choose. When you picked the business." He shrugged, but she could see the old hurt in his eyes. "I figured I had my answer." Emma looked up from her coloring. "Daddy, why do you look sad when you talk about Mommy?" Evangeline's heart clenched at the word Mommy. 6 years of maternal instincts she'd buried deep were clawing their way to the surface with each passing moment. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Adults always say that when they mean they made mistakes," Ethan observed with startling wisdom for a 5-year-old. Adrian's laugh was rueful. "Smart boy, yes. Daddy made some big mistakes. So did Mommy," Evangeline added quietly, surprising herself with the admission. She'd spent 6 years convincing herself she'd made the right choice, that love was a weakness she couldn't afford. But looking at these beautiful children, her children, she wondered what other choice she could have made. "I didn't find out about the pregnancy until 2 months after the divorce was final," Adrian continued, his voice low. "You were already in London, and when I called—" He paused, pain flickering across his features. "Your assistant said you'd left strict instructions not to put any calls from me through. Ever," Evangeline remembered. She'd been raw, heartbroken, and desperate to cauterize the wound Adrian had left in her chest. "I thought it was for the best. I tried other ways to reach you, letters, emails, even flew to London once. But you'd built walls around yourself that I couldn't breach." His fingers drummed against the table. "By then, I had 2 babies who needed me. I couldn't keep chasing a ghost." The waitress approached with their dinner, and they fell silent as plates were arranged. Evangeline watched Adrian effortlessly switch into father mode, cutting Emma's pasta into smaller pieces and reminding Ethan to use his napkin. The domesticity of it all felt like a knife to her chest. This should have been her life too, do I? "You hate me?" she asked suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Adrian's hand stilled on Ethan's plate. When he looked at her, his blue eyes were dark with emotion. "I tried to. God knows I tried." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But loving you was like breathing, Evie. You don't just stop because it hurts." The admission hung between them like a live wire, crackling with unresolved tension and longing. Evangeline felt heat rise in her cheeks, her body remembering despite her mind's protests. The way he looked at her, like she was still the woman he'd once loved desperately, made her feel exposed in ways that had nothing to do with the elegant cocktail dress she wore. "Why now?" she managed to ask. "Why bring them to me now?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Because Emma asked me last week why she couldn't have a mommy like the other kids at school. And because—" He hesitated, then met her eyes directly. "Because I'm getting married next month." The words hit her like a physical blow. Jealousy, sharp and unexpected, sliced through her chest. "Congratulations," she managed, proud of how level her voice sounded. "Her name is Victoria. She's good with the kids, and she wants to adopt them legally after we're married." Adrian's knuckles were white where he gripped his glass. "But I couldn't let that happen without giving you the chance to be their mother first. They deserve to know you, Evie. And you deserve to know them." Evangeline's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, but all she could focus on was Emma's small hand reaching for hers across the table, sticky with pasta sauce and warm with trust. "Mommy, will you come see our bedroom? Daddy says you might want to read us stories." Looking into those green eyes, her eyes, Evangeline felt something inside her chest crack wide open. 6 years of armor, of telling herself she didn't need love or family, shattered in an instant. "I'd love to, sweetheart," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Adrian's townhouse in Lincoln Park was nothing like the sterile modern apartment they'd once shared. This was a home. Warm, hardwood floors scattered with toys, children's artwork covering the refrigerator, and the comfortable chaos that came with raising twins. Evangeline stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the life Adrian had built without her. "Our room is upstairs," Emma announced, grabbing Evangeline's hand with the easy trust of childhood. "Come on, I'll show you all my dolls." The twins' bedroom was painted in soft yellows and greens, with twin beds covered in quilts that looked handmade. But what made Evangeline's breath catch were the framed photographs on the nightstand, pictures of her from magazines and newspapers, cut out and lovingly displayed. "Daddy told us stories about you," Ethan explained, sitting on his bed. "He said you were the smartest, strongest woman in the world, and that you had magic in your hands that could build anything." Evangeline sank down beside him, her throat tight with emotion. "Did he now?" "Uh-huh. And he said you had the most beautiful smile, but that you were probably too busy saving the world to smile very much anymore." Emma climbed onto her other side, small and warm against Evangeline's silk blouse. "Are you sad, Mommy? You look like Daddy does sometimes when he thinks we're not watching." "A little," Evangeline admitted, wrapping her arms around both children instinctively. They fit against her like puzzle pieces she hadn't known were missing. "But happy too. Very, very happy to finally meet you both." They read 3 bedtime stories, and Evangeline found herself doing different voices for the characters, making the twins giggle until Adrian appeared in the doorway with a soft smile that took her breath away. "Time for sleep, troublemakers," he said gently. "Mommy will be here tomorrow too." The casual assumption in his words, that she would stay, that she would come back, should have made her bristle with its presumption. Instead, it filled her with a warmth she hadn't felt in 6 years. After tucking the children in, they found themselves alone in Adrian's living room, the silence heavy with unspoken words and the weight of lost time. "You kept pictures of me," Evangeline said, accepting the glass of wine he offered her. "I couldn't erase you from their lives completely. It didn't seem fair." He settled beside her on the couch, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn years ago. "They used to ask about you constantly. Emma especially. She's always been intuitive about emotions. She's beautiful. They both are." Evangeline curled her legs under her, wine making her feel loose and vulnerable. "I can't believe I missed 5 years of their lives." "You didn't miss it by choice. I made that decision for you." Adrian's voice was rough with regret. "If I could take back, don't." She held up a hand to stop him. "We both made choices, Adrian. I could have tried harder to reach you too after I cooled down, but I was so hurt, so angry." She looked down at her wine glass. "I convinced myself you were better off without me. I was never better off without you, Evie. Not for a single day." The honesty in his voice made her look up, and the intensity in his blue eyes nearly undid her. He was looking at her the way he used to, like she was his entire world. Like nothing else mattered but the woman sitting in front of him. "You're getting married," she whispered, reminding them both of the barrier between them. "I am," but he leaned closer anyway, his hand coming up to trace the line of her jaw with familiar tenderness. "I'm marrying a wonderful woman who will be a good mother to our children. It's practical, safe, everything our marriage wasn't." "And loveless?" His thumb brushed across her lower lip and she shivered. "I thought love was the problem. I thought if I could find something calm, stable." "Does she know? About me?" "She knows you exist. She doesn't know that I still dream about you every night." His confession was barely above a whisper, his face, so close to hers she could feel his breath against her skin. "She doesn't know that I kept one of your old t-shirts, and sometimes I sleep with it just to remember what it felt like to have you in my bed." "Adrian?" His name was a plea on her lips, though for what, she wasn't sure. "Tell me you feel nothing," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me these 6 years killed whatever was between us, and I'll marry Victoria with a clear conscience. I'll be the husband she deserves instead of the man who's still hopelessly in love with his ex-wife." Evangeline's carefully constructed defenses crumbled completely. "I can't," she breathed. "God help me. I can't." When his lips touched hers, it was like coming home after years in exile. Soft at first, tentative, testing whether she would pull away. When she didn't, when she melted against him with a soft moan of surrender, the kiss deepened, became hungry, desperate, full of 6 years of longing and regret. His hands tangled in her hair, messing her perfect updo, and she didn't care. She climbed into his lap, her dress riding up her thighs, needing to be closer, needing to feel alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "Evie," he groaned against her mouth, his hands roaming over the familiar territory of her body like he was relearning a map. "I've missed you so much it physically hurt." She kissed him deeper, pouring 6 years of loneliness and suppressed desire into the connection between them. Tomorrow there would be consequences, complications, reality to face. But tonight, in this moment, she was just a woman rediscovering the man she'd never stopped loving. Evangeline woke in Adrian's bed wearing nothing but his t-shirt, sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. She hadn't spent the night anywhere but her own pristine penthouse in years. Then memory flooded back. Passionate kisses on the couch, Adrian carrying her upstairs while she laughed breathlessly against his neck, and hours of rediscovering each other's bodies with reverent hands and whispered promises. "Mommy." Emma's voice preceded the sound of small feet running down the hallway. "Daddy said you're staying for pancakes." Evangeline barely had time to pull the covers up before both twins burst through the door, climbing onto the bed with the enthusiasm only children possessed. Adrian appeared in the doorway, fully dressed and holding a cup of coffee, his smile soft and intimate as their eyes met. "I told them you might need a few minutes to wake up," he said, but his eyes were saying something entirely different, taking in her tousled hair and bare shoulders with the look of a man who'd spent the night worshipping every inch of her skin. "I'm awake," she laughed, accepting the chaos of having 2 5-year-olds bouncing on either side of her. This was so far from her usual morning routine of silent meditation and green juice, but the joy on their faces made her chest tight with emotion. "But I don't have any clothes here for breakfast." "Daddy's shirt looks pretty on you," Emma declared with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. "It's too big, but you smell like him now, which means you're part of our family." Evangeline's breath caught, out of the mouths of babes. "Emma, sweetheart, I have some of your old things," Adrian interrupted gently. "If you want them. I kept more than I should have." 20 minutes later, wearing a sundress she'd left behind 6 years ago that still fit perfectly, Evangeline found herself in Adrian's kitchen making pancakes while he handled coffee, and the twins set the table with more enthusiasm than precision. "You still make them in the shape of animals," Adrian observed, watching her pour batter into the pan. "Muscle memory," she replied, but the truth was more complicated. She'd never made pancakes for anyone else, had barely cooked at all in the past 6 years, but somehow, being here with them, she remembered the woman she used to be, the one who dreamed of Sunday mornings exactly like this. "Look, Mommy made mine look like a butterfly," Emma squealed, and the title no longer felt foreign on her tongue. After breakfast, while the twins played in the backyard, Adrian and Evangeline found themselves alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around coffee mugs, the weight of reality settling between them. "I have to call Victoria," Adrian said quietly. "I have to tell her." "What exactly will you tell her?" Evangeline asked. "That you slept with your ex-wife? That the mother of your children showed up and suddenly you're having second thoughts?" "I'll tell her the truth. That I made a mistake thinking I could marry someone when I'm still in love with someone else." His blue eyes were steady, certain. "It's not fair to her, and it's not fair to you or to Emma and Ethan." Evangeline set down her mug, her hands shaking slightly, And then what, Adrian? What happens after you break up with her? Do we just pick up where we left off 6 years ago? Pretend that time didn't change us both? I don't know, he admitted. I just know that last night was the first time in 6 years I felt like myself again, the first time I felt whole. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Tell me you didn't feel it too. She had felt it. More than felt it. She'd been consumed by it. The way he touched her, looked at her, whispered her name like a prayer in the darkness. It was everything she'd tried to forget, everything she'd convinced herself she didn't need. I felt it, she whispered. But feelings aren't enough, are they? We tried this once before and we destroyed each other. We were kids then. Stubborn, proud kids who didn't know how to compromise. Adrian stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. I'm not the same man who gave you ultimatums, Evie, and you're not the same woman who ran instead of fighting for us. Through the window they could see Emma and Ethan building something elaborate in the sandbox, their heads bent together in concentration, and Evangeline felt her heart swell with a love so fierce it took her breath away. They need stability, she said, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. They need their parents. Both of them. Together. Adrian's hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she was crying. I love you, Evangeline Cross. I loved you 6 years ago. I loved you yesterday when I saw you standing in front of that building like some conquering goddess. And I'll love you 6 years from now when we're watching these babies graduate from college. Adrian, marry me, he said simply. Again, for real this time. Not because it makes sense or because it's practical, but because we're better together than apart. Because those kids deserve to have both their parents under the same roof. And because I can't imagine spending another day without you. Before she could answer, Emma came running through the kitchen door, her face bright with excitement. Mommy, Daddy, come see what we built. It's a castle for all of us to live in. Evangeline looked from her daughter's shining face to Adrian's hopeful eyes, and felt the last of her walls crumble completely. Maybe love wasn't a weakness after all. Maybe it was the strongest thing she'd ever found. Yes, she whispered, and wasn't sure if she was answering Adrian's proposal or Emma's request to see their castle, but it didn't matter. The answer was the same either way. 3 months later, Evangeline stood in the bridal suite of the Drake Hotel, adjusting her simple ivory dress in the mirror. This time, there would be no elaborate ceremony, no society pages coverage, no prenups or lawyers or anything that had complicated their first attempt at marriage. Just family, love, and the promise to do better this time. You look beautiful, Mommy, Emma said from her perch on the velvet chair, wearing a pale pink dress that matched her flower girl basket. Like a real princess. She is a real princess, Ethan declared solemnly, straightening his miniature bow tie. Daddy said so. Evangeline's heart swelled as she knelt down to their level. These past 3 months of learning to be a mother had been the most challenging and rewarding of her life. There had been tantrums and tears, bedtime stories and scraped knees, and through it all, the steady presence of Adrian as they learned to co-parent and fall in love all over again. Are you ready to be a real family now? Emma asked with the directness only children possessed. More ready than I've ever been for anything, Evangeline replied, and meant it completely. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in the hotel's garden with just a handful of close friends and Adrian's parents, who had welcomed her back with tears and forgiveness. But as she walked down the petal-strewn aisle toward Adrian with Emma and Ethan dancing ahead of her, Evangeline felt like she was finally walking toward her real life. Adrian looked devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. Pure love and wonder, like he couldn't quite believe she was really there, really his again. Hi, he whispered when she reached him, taking her hands in his. Hi yourself, she whispered back, feeling giddy and young and hopeful in ways she'd forgotten were possible. The ceremony was everything their first wedding hadn't been. Personal, meaningful, focused on the promises they were making rather than the spectacle surrounding them. When Adrian slipped the simple platinum band onto her finger, his voice was rough with emotion. I promise to love you not despite your ambitions, but because of them. To support your dreams while we build new ones together. To be your partner in everything, always. Evangeline's own vows came from the deepest part of her heart. I promise to trust you with my heart, even when it scares me. To choose us. Every day, even when it's difficult. To be the mother our children deserve and the wife you've always needed. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian kissed her with such tenderness that several guests wiped their eyes. But it was Emma and Ethan launching themselves at both parents in an enthusiastic group hug that made Evangeline laugh through her tears. That evening, after the twins were finally asleep in their new bedroom in Evangeline's penthouse, now their family home, Adrian found her on the terrace looking out over the city lights. Regrets? He asked, sliding his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong against her spine. Only that it took us so long to get here. We weren't ready before, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. We had to become the people we are now to make this work. Wise words, Mr. Cross. She'd convinced him to take her name this time, a gesture that meant more to both of them than she'd expected. I learned from the best, Mrs. Cross. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their city spread out below them like a constellation of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, blending their lives completely, balancing her demanding career with motherhood, learning to navigate marriage with the wisdom that came from having lost each other once before. But tonight, wrapped in Adrian's arms with their children safe and warm inside, Evangeline felt a peace she'd never known was possible. She'd spent 6 years building an empire, but this family, this love, this second chance was the greatest thing she'd ever created. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Adrian replied, his voice full of promise. All of us, forever. Through the open terrace doors, they could hear Emma talking to Ethan in their sleep. Something about castles and princesses and families that stayed together always. Evangeline smiled, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in standing alone, but in choosing to fall together, trusting that love would catch you both. Their second chance had become their forever, and it was more beautiful than any fairy tale she could have imagined.